Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Higai Leadership. I am Drew Harrell and I'm here today with Jody Fisher, founder and owner of Jody Fisher PR. Jody, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Drew, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely, man. PR is something we haven't had somebody on here but talk about PR yet, surprisingly enough. But we talk about marketing, we talk about sales, we talk about a lot of things that are like kind of around PR and branding, obviously. But we haven't talked about PR directly, so I'm excited to have this conversation and learn more about that and educate some people about what PR is. But before we do that, tell us more about you. What was your journey like? What made you start this company and get in this world?
Sure. And again, thanks for having me on. I guess I've been in business for myself for only about a year. Just ran past in March of 2024, my 1 year anniversary, which is
Congrats.
exciting. I've been doing this PR thing for the better part, I guess, of 25 plus years. And I've been in news and media, including PR, since the early 90s. I actually started out in this business as a radio reporter. That's what I wanted to be when I grew up. And went to a college where I picked the college that I went to, not on the academics, but actually on the fact that they had a radio station that I could walk into day one
Nice.
and have the opportunity to be on the air, because that's what I wanted to do.
Mm.
And so went to that college, and within about a month, I was, reading small bits on the air on the daily newscast. They had a very aggressive student-run news department on the radio station. That's what I wanted to do,
Mhm.
and worked my way up. And I spent every day of 4 years, including a couple of summers, being behind the microphone, being out in the street with my microphone and my cell phone. Back in the days of bag phones, if you can remember those bag phones
Yeah.
and beepers. But doing the business of news and really having a practical hands-on, almost like an internship,
Mhm.
really having a practical hands-on experience with news. So when I graduate, I walk right into a job at an all news radio station in New York City. Granted, I was at entry level at that, but I had the chops to prove that I could do what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And within 6 months of that, I got a break. As breaks happen, there was some kind of a disaster. And boom, I was the guy who was most available and I was on the air. And after that, they treated me as an on-air reporter. So there I was at age 24. I get 23, 24. After being told that I would have to move to wherever it was, small market radio somewhere in the middle of nowhere. I said, no, I'm going to stay here in New York. And I managed to accomplish that. And so then I was on the air in the New York market for, I guess, 6 or 7 years before I decided, for scheduling reasons, that I didn't really want to be doing this anymore.
Mm.
And I could tell you plenty of stories that went into that decision. It wasn't that I was fed up with radio. I forecasted it forward in my life, and it wasn't grabbing me for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I segued into PR. And PR is, to me, reporting in reverse. It's almost like in the negative, right? I'm still a storyteller, and that's what we do. Is reporters tell stories, and PR people tell stories. We just tell it from different sides of the wall, if you will, different sides of the news desk. And I'm now, instead of reporting on stories that I get sent, I'm now pitching stories to reporters on behalf of my clients to hopefully have reporters tell them.
That's so fascinating, right? Because I never thought of it that way, but that makes perfect sense. And it's like perspective, right? You're from one side of the desk, you're a journalist, a reporter. On the other side of the desk, you're a PR person, right? Which
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, you were saying something?
Go ahead.
No, I was curious, like what side of the desk do you feel like was more fun for you, or is more fun for you?
Oh, that's a great, more fun. That's a great question. I've never been asked that. Um, well, I guess it depends on your perspective, right? On the one
Mhm.
hand, when I was a reporter, I went places and I did things and I met people. I always had a story to tell at a party, right? And I met really, household names like, the favorite people I ever met were people like Alan Shepard,
Mm.
guys in the. I'm a bit of a geek, right? So guys from the Mercury program, the NASA Mercury program, people like that.
Nice.
Obviously you meet people who are, mayors and governors and senators and, all those kind of silly people. My favorite people that I ever met when I was a reporter are the regular people. You'd go out and you do a thing called MOS, man on the street. This is typically when maybe it's a slow news day, and there's something going on that everybody's talking about. So a reporter will go out and just interview people on the street. What do you think? And sort of taking the pulse of the listenership of the radio station. TV rarely does this, but radio, we used to do this all the time.
Wow.
First great beach day, we're down at the beach talking to people who are at the beach. The wild and crazy political scandal, we're out on the street talking to people what they think. And one of my favorite things to do was to stand outside a Dunkin' Donuts or on the Long Island Railroad platform and talking to commuters and talking to, people who are up early, who are up late, who are going about their daily routine and their daily business, and they got a million things they got to worry about, and hearing from them what's important to them. That was really fun and interesting for me. And I think a lot more than, meeting someone who might be quote unquote famous.
Yeah. That's super fascinating. I mean, because I think I see people doing that nowadays online, like in terms of you see like Jordan Klepper or people like that who are out there, getting those, they're taking the pulse of what would you call it? MOS?
MOS, man on the street. Yeah.
Man on the street. Yeah. The man on the street model, I think is used. I think nowadays it's almost used as a satire tool, right? To kind of be like, oh, this is kind of, but it's cool to think of it as an actual tool back in the day where people were actually like really informed enough to have educated opinions about stuff. Because nowadays you don't see that anymore. I mean, you don't, at least they don't highlight those things anymore, right? They don't highlight the real, like kind of like, it's always satire of some sort. It's like, oh, hey, let's prove that people have no idea what they're talking about this concept, or that there's so much misinformation about this other concept,
Well, you know what it is for me, and this goes into what I do now as a PR person. It is still authentic, regardless of whether it's satirical or ridiculous, or or what kind of thing you might event you might be attending. And Jordan Klepper on Daily Show does that better than anybody.
Yeah.
It's still authentic. The stuff that's coming out of those people's mouths, you may agree, disagree, call them crazy, whatever. It's still an authentic thought that they're having. And that is really important. And I think it's part of the reporter's DNA. And I think the news media's DNA. You can get wrapped up all you want in, fake news or the agenda of the news media, left, right, middle, whatever.
Right.
Their job at the end of the day is telling authentic stories, telling real stories about real people in communities, to audiences that care about, what that story is and what is going on in their communities. Reporters are still the primary information mechanism in a community. And that's why it's so important that we maintain a vibrant news media industry. Not just so I have a job and have stories to pitch to people, but so we're actually getting real information back. I mean, reporters, also need to ask the hard questions that maybe are hard to ask. They're meant to be, the thumb in the eye of the establishment. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Again, irrespective of your political view, most reporters I know are not political people. The people who sit, the talking heads who sit on TV, they're political. They have political agendas. Like I said, left, right, middle, whatever. The reporters who are out in the street are just doing their job, and they're informing their communities.
Yeah, they're storytellers, right? I mean, they're telling the story.
Right.
And the spin is in the newsroom. It's not on the street, right?
Exactly. This spin, if you will, and boy, nails on a chalkboard for a PR guy. But
sorry.
But it's okay. But the spin is like in the talking heads, right? Or in whether it's the Rachel Maddows or the Fox Newses or the whoever's, and they're all guilty. They're all guilty of doing this. And that's where, I think news becomes that infotainment kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And that echo chamber thing. And people will gravitate toward the thing they want to hear, or that, that reinforces their predetermined predisposition. It comes in a different area of news. And in fact, I don't even call that stuff news. I mean, yes, it's maybe it's built around information, but it's really not news. It's talk.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot, and I feel like we could talk about this all day. But I wanted to talk to you about business specifically, so I apologize for taking it on the different direction. That was my fault. But that was super fascinating
Well,
stuff. I
I'll talk about this stuff all day because I love
oh,
it.
I would love to. We can have a whole nother offline conversation about this because it's just super fascinating to me, right? It's stories. Both of our work is about stories, right? At the end of the
Yeah.
day, and when you're talking about business owners and their stories, right? How do you get a business owner to tell their story in a way that, well, let me back up actually. How do you get a business owner to realize that they need to tell, that they need to tell their story? Because a lot of business owners don't think about it in terms of PR is a priority for me, right? They're like, oh, what's my story going to mean or something like that. So when you talk to a business owner, how do you get them to know, like, listen, you got to invest in some PR?
Yeah. They come in different shapes and sizes. Um, I'll get some clients, I'll get a lot of clients that are prospective clients that come to me and they have this idea that they want to be in the paper, right?
Mhm.
It's the phrase we want to be out there, quote unquote, out there. If I had a
Yeah.
nickel for every out there, I wouldn't have to work. Um, but the thing is that they have a misconception about the process of getting out there and how they effectively get out there, right? And they'll frequently say, like, we want to be in the New York Times, or we want to be on CNN, or we want to be, fill in the name of your news outlet, their favorite ego-driven news outlet, because it's the one they watch, it's the one their
Mhm.
peers watch, it's the one that they think is the biggest deal in their mind.
Right.
And it's my job as a PR person to connect them not with the ego feeding media hit, but with the media that will connect them with their audiences. Because
Mhm.
what I always I talk about a lot is whenever you're talking to a reporter or when you're pitching a reporter a story, trying to get them interested in your story, you're not just talking to them, you're talking to their audience. And
Right.
so you need to view that story through the filter that they use. Is this important to our audience? And reporters generally report on two criteria: geography and subject matter, right? Either this story needs to be important to the geographic audience that we serve, and think, their local daily newspapers or a local TV newscast or something like that,
Mhm.
or subject matter. Think of, your favorite subject matter magazine, whether that's real estate and construction, computers, tech, sports, men's, women's, kids, parents, on down the line, you get it.
Right.
If you view a story through those filters, you will start to figure out who you want to talk to and which media let you talk to those audiences the best. It's just like having a customer, right? Where are our customers living?
Yep.
Where do our customers get their information? How do we connect with them to inspire them to come do business with us? That's how you have to decide, not, hey, it's going to feel really good to be on the front page of the New York Times, which I always joke. I say, when you do something worthy of being on the front page of the New York Times, they'll put you there. You don't need me
Right.
for it.
Yeah, no, and that's a good way to frame it. I like that framing because, like, to your point, it is definitely parallel to marketing in terms in that target audience idea, right? Start with the audience in mind. Who do you want to be appealing to? Who do you want to be in front of? And then work your way backwards, as opposed to like, oh, I want to be in this place. Well, how do you even know your customers are there, right? If your business is to serve, I don't know, lawyers, and you're a psychologist, well, appearing in front of more psychologists is not really going to help you, right? So,
Exactly.
no,
And
that's awesome.
we're also going to have a much harder time placing a story that is very narrowly focused. If you want to tell a very narrowly focused story to appeal to a very specific audience, you're going to have a really hard time getting in the New York Times or on CNN or somewhere
Mhm.
like that. And chances are the majority of people you want to reach probably don't consume their news through that channel, or if they do, they'll miss it because consumers are not like, I am, or I read, 5 or 6 daily newspapers a day, and 20 magazines a week. And, I'm just constantly going through media materials to educate myself on where the story possibilities are. People miss more than they see, right?
Yeah.
Even you think of your daily newspaper. Do you really read your daily newspaper every single day, cover to cover? Probably not. So
I don't even have a
get
newspaper
in the
anymore.
places that's going to make the most sense for your audience.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And when you think about working with business owners, what's the biggest challenge, or maybe the top 3 challenges you find the business owners have when you first approach them about PR, or the misconceptions, or any of that stuff that holds you back from being able to do your job with them?
I think there are a few, and I don't know if these are in any particular order.
Sure.
One is certainly adjusting them to what we just talked about, right?
Mhm.
Understanding where their audience is. I think two, helping them understand that they don't need to recognize what makes a good story for a PR person, for a media outlet. All they need to know is they need to react like a human being, right? And what I typically say to them is, if you ever do something or come across something in your day to day that makes you go, oh, wow, that's cool, that's probably a news story. That's
Mm.
probably something that I can start to work with. And that's when you fire off an email or a text to me and say, hey, we're doing this thing, or I just found out about this thing, or this thing is really, I think this thing is really interesting. What do you think? Because it's not their idea to create a full PR story. That's my job. I typically say I'm your carpenter. I can build you the house, but you've got to bring me the wood. You got to,
Mm.
you got to bring me the tree that I can work with, right? The raw material. So that's number two, is just getting people to sort of have that light bulb go off, because I need that content. I can't make this stuff up myself.
Right.
And I think a third thing maybe is just um, getting them comfortable. Some are and some aren't, but getting them comfortable with actually getting the attention. Sometimes they want the attention, but they don't want to be the person who's quoted, or they don't want to be the person who does the interview. And what I
Mhm.
will say to them is, every story has to have an individual who articulates the story, right? Buildings
Mhm.
don't have mouths. Products don't have mouths. They can't tell stories. There's a person that's got to tell a story. Now, it's not the CEO every time. Maybe it's the product manager. Maybe it's the person who developed the technology. Someone further in the weeds with with the thing that we're talking about. And it's always best to talk to the person who is right at the touch point of the story.
Mhm.
It's also great to find in a product relationship, like the consumer, the person who's benefiting from it, the award recipient, the grant recipient, the scholarship recipient, so, the patient in a medical story, something like that. You need to tell it through the eyes of people, because every story, as you know, Drew, is about people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no story without the characters, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah. So in your work, I mean, what have been some of the stories that have stuck with you that are like, oh, this is never gonna be, this is never gonna leave my mind. This is like living rent free in my mind right now.
Oh, yeah, I got a few. If you haven't figured out already, I'm a bit of a nerd and a geek. I love my tech. I love my sci-fi. I'm a Star Wars fan and all that stuff. But I'll tell you, some of the coolest stuff I ever did. Um, I worked for the Intrepid Sea, Air and Space Museum for a number
Mm.
of years. I was their PR. Wasn't inside. I worked as their PR rep with an agency that I was with in Manhattan. And so we did all kinds of cool stuff. The Intrepid Sea, Air and Space Museum, for those who don't know, is a museum located on an aircraft carrier, World War II era aircraft carrier that's docked on the west side of Manhattan. And just I got to walk on that thing all the time, which is just super cool, right? You go down in the places where only the crew ever saw, and that kind of cool stuff. But one of the things that we did with them was we ran a campaign when NASA was giving away all of its space shuttles. We ran a campaign to secure one of the space shuttles and bring it to New York.
Mm.
I found out in the process of that the Intrepid was actually one of the Navy recovery vessels for the Gemini space program. When those
Oh,
space capsules, splashed down in the Pacific Ocean in the early
yeah.
days of the NASA space program. So that was sort of legitimized the why we get a space shuttle in New York, or why we should have a space shuttle in New York.
Mhm.
Long story short, won the campaign and brought it to New York. So I managed all the press and worked with all the folks around the journey of the Space Shuttle Enterprise, which was at the Smithsonian, up to New York. So that includes removing it from the Smithsonian, putting it on the back of a 747, flying it into JFK, putting it on the back of a barge, bringing it up the Hudson River,
Wow.
accidentally hitting a bridge on the way and broke off.
Oh
Broke
my
off a
god,
little of the
really?
wing. Yeah, it's been documented. It's okay. It's
Oh
out
my
there.
god.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun on a Sunday afternoon. Um, but and then finally getting it onto the deck of the aircraft carrier, and in the process meeting more of the NASA astronauts. I mentioned a few before, a few of the NASA astronauts who were involved in the space shuttle program, including Fred Hayes, who was a commander of one of the original of the Enterprise when it was, test flying. Basically, they brought it up in the air and they just launched it off the back of the 747 and figured out how they could land it. Right, that was part of what he did. But
Mhm.
Fred Hayes was one of the astronauts on the Apollo 13 mission.
That's why I know the name.
And
Yeah.
as we all know, yeah, Apollo 13 was the one that almost never made it.
Yeah.
The Tom Hanks movie, et cetera, et cetera. And I got to meet Fred Hayes, and the nicest man you've ever met, talked about everything under the sun except Apollo 13. He was not
Mm.
interested. But nevertheless, so fun stuff like that, right? And I got to crawl up inside of the space shuttle and into the bay, and I got up on the deck and everything. It was all stripped out. There wasn't even a chair to sit in. I couldn't even play around.
Oh man, super cool
But
though.
it's really cool stuff like that. I got to do some fun stuff like that.
That's phenomenal, man. Those are the stories that stick with you, right? Like that's the stuff that that's why we do what we do, because we can have like those kind of experiences and really support people and tell stories like that, where it's like these are the stories that you're not going to hear, and unless you really take the time to listen and focus on these different businesses and different things that are out there, No, that's great, man. That's phenomenal. So for business owners who want to reach out and are thinking about hiring a PR person, what are some things to consider before they hire somebody like you?
Sure. I think a couple of things. One is you have to be prepared to put yourself out there. You have to be okay with shining a bit of a light back on yourself. And like we said before, not just on your product or on your thing, but on you,
Mhm.
because every story has to be articulated by a person. So you got to be comfortable with a little bit of publicity that involves you or involves the people in your organization. You have to also be okay, I think, with um, not everybody loving you. I
Mm.
think that CEOs and business and people who are doing something, we want to they want to be loved, right? They want everybody to think their thing is really cool. In pursuing publicity, you're going to get a lot of no's, and when you finally get out there, I think you're also going to get a lot of people, who take advantage of the target that you've voluntarily put on your back, right? So you
Yep.
got to be okay with a little bit of friction. You got to be okay with a little bit of criticism. You also have to be prepared to understand that PR doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
Um, we live in a world of immediate gratification, right? We push a button and it's live on social media,
Yep.
and in an hour we get 1,000 TikTok views. PR doesn't work that way. And I tell clients when I start working with them, it's going to be 3 months. It could be 3 months. I shouldn't say it is, but it could be 3 months before we actually get the thing that we're setting out to get. And it could be longer than that. It could be 6 months, depending on how grandiose your plans are and the thing you actually want to achieve. It could take longer than that. PR is a long game, and it
Yeah.
takes a lot of pushing stories out to a lot of different media, a lot of different reporters, before you potentially get that result that you want. So patience is a really important part of engaging in a PR campaign. And then also just enjoying the ride. Once you start to get a little bit of traction, it can really feel good. And then eventually, like I said, a little bit of negativity, something might come up. But here's the reason that I encourage everybody to engage in some form of PR, whether you work with somebody like me, you have somebody in-house doing it, or you're just sort of doing it homespun, kind of pushing out some press releases and things like that. PR is telling your history. It's writing your history. Think about what you want your customers 5 years from now to find about you when they Google you. If you're
Mm.
not engaged in a proactive, positive PR campaign to write that history in the form of news coverage and in the form of other things that pop up on Google, they're not going to have anything to find about you. So you've got to be active in telling your story in that way. So that's why I say PR is it's a really effective way to help people understand who you are, what you do, why you get out of bed in the morning, and what they should believe about you when they go and they search for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's great. Those are great tips, man. I think that any business owner could benefit from those because, like you said, those are things that people wouldn't necessarily know to think about before they approach this kind of conversation. So, Jody, this is great, man. Thanks so much. How do people find you? Where do you want folks to go? The links are going to be below, but I'd love for folks to hear from you. Where they can reach you? Where do you prefer to get reached out to?
Absolutely. The easiest place to go is my website, jodyfisherpr.com. I'm on all the socials at Jody Fisher. And we can also send people to the podcast that I do. It comes out once a week on Mondays. It's called The PR Podcast. We talk about how news gets made.
Fantastic, man. Jody, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today, albeit briefly. But folks, if you want to reach out if you're curious about PR, I want to reach out to Jody, please feel free to do that. He's awesome. He's great at what he does. Obviously, he's got a lot of passion for it. And yeah, he's going to tell your story. Let him give him what you need to tell your story the way you want him to tell it. So thanks again. Jody, thanks again. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you, Drew.
Take care, everybody. Stay safe.